As they rounded the corner to the frozen town square, they spotted Mr. Nuncreed inching cautiously toward a pit at its center. He held his arms out gingerly, as if approaching a beast in the wild. Upon closing the distance, Luka recognized what Nuncreed was after. Gran stood confidently at the edge, one arm outstretched over the abyss. Nearby, a wheelbarrow had been emptied out. She held a lit torch, which flickered in the bitter wind. Mr. Nuncreed turned back toward the kids, desperation in his eyes. Rollowenbach held steadfast in awe. Luka approached closer. Mr. Nuncreed spun back toward Gran, his voice growing louder. Mr. Nuncreed winced with anguish. His voice hardened. They both now yelled, not to each other, but at fate itself, making their peace with long-held burdens. The wind howled with encouragement. They menaced at each other, both catching their breath. The moment balanced on a knife's edge. Amid a blur of emotions and memories, Luka's mind flooded with questions. The wind calmed, as if to give him the stage. And in the stillness, he began to weep. It was all just too much. Falling to his knees, Luka whimpered softly. The tears crystallized as they hit the snow. Gran stared at Luka for a moment with warm sympathy. remembering why this was all necessary. She stiffened up and brandished the torch at Mr. Nuncreed. Ignoring his final plea, Gran flung the torch into the deep darkness. She smiled and exhaled in relief. Mr. Nuncreed moaned in resignation. The torch echoed as it ricocheted down the hole, punctuated with a thunderous thud. Before Gran could finish, the ground shook her to silence. Gran only had time to spin around and run to Luka. Her attempt to shield him, an honorable but trifling act. Unflinching love, pitted against an unthinking horror. There was no contest. Her warm embrace froze in an instant. That is where they remain, fixed in place, forever. And so, our story ends on this melancholy scene. In a town brought low by its secrets, sits the frozen statues of a misguided band of meddlers. The end. Well, that was dire. On the bright side, we finally figured out where all the ice is coming from. Now, we just need to find a way to deal with a mystic, unfathomable force of nature. They'd run the classic good cop, chill cop interrogation. Luka walked calmly to the light switch, flicking it off and on a few times. Mr. Tolliver shook his head, gathering his wits. He looked over to find Luka, who returned a calming grin. Rollo and Beck emerged from hiding to give a timid wave. Luka glanced over to Rollo and Beck, who replied with skeptical looks. Mr. Tolliver exhaled with disappointment. Luka gestured to the corner. Luka looked again to Rollo and Beck. This time they shrugged. Luka began to slowly loosen the bindings. Mr. Tolliver gently rubbed his wrists. He edged imperceptibly toward the stairs as he spoke. Before the kids had even noticed his movement, Mr. Tolliver was at the light switch. He punctuated his final words by flicking the switch and rushing up the stairs. Beck darted to the wall and turned back on the lights. It was too late. Rollo confirmed what they all heard. Mr. Tolliver's muffled voice came from behind the door. They looked bewildered at each other. They heard the staccato thump of quick steps exiting the house. The kids looked down in resignation. This isn't how it goes in Hank Atomic. For some reason, they'd always assumed it was up to them to save their town. Luka opened his mouth, hoping to conjure some magical words to make this right. Only a hollow croak escaped. The end. Well, we certainly aren't going to find a grand resolution to our tale locked in a basement. Back to the drawing board. Luka drew himself up and decided to take the only option they had left: flight. He squinted down the barrel of the mission control defense cannon, aiming it through an opening in the dense tree branches. He looked up with surprise as it struck true and taut. Luka and Iggy winced as they sprinted through the thicket. The branches clawed at them, reluctant to give passage. After what felt like a marathon, Luka stopped in his tracks as they reached the clearing. What the? That was all he was able to say before Iggy slammed into his back. The boys tumbled down a steep decline and crashed with a wheezing thud on a surface as hard as ice. In fact, it was ice. Chapter 5. Signs. They stood silently, catching their breath. The sky was like sapphire. With each breath, a plume of steam escaped from Luka's lungs. Let's keep moving. Luka pulled Iggy to his feet as they gazed across a snowy terrain. Luka had almost forgotten the walkie-talkie he was carrying. Luka looked at Iggy with hesitation. With a resigned sigh, Luka responded. Luka winced, shoving the walkie-talkie back into his pocket. A disc of smooth metal was lightly covered in snow. Two faint seams were visible along the surface. The boys stared in disbelief at the sign that now clearly read, "Welcome to Beacon Pines." The fencing listened. each chain link encapsulated with a translucent layer of ice. Looking down at the frozen stream, Luka could faintly see a school of minnows encased in the ice. The crunching of footsteps trailing Luka went hush. He looked back to see Iggy's face twisted with confusion. Luka peered upward at the darkening sky. He let out a long, foggy breath. Faintly, Iggy began to cry. Seeing Iggy in such a pathetic state gave Luka a sense of compassion, and more than a little guilt. Luka allowed himself to collapse next to Iggy. The boys huddled together for warmth and comfort. If not for exhaustion, their minds would be racing, trying to make sense of the events of the day. As it was, all they had energy for was to sit in silence, numb. Iggy motioned sarcastically to his half-deformed face. Iggy shrugged. Iggy now wept openly. He wiped his nose with a sleeve. Luka gave a warm chuckle. Iggy cleared his throat as he wiped his eyes. Iggy arched into a wide yawn. Luka's eyelids began to slowly drift shut. That's all Luka could whisper before succumbing to sleep. Iggy snuggled in some more. The house smelled of warm bread. Luka was playing with toy blocks on the living room rug. He looked up to see his parents on the couch. His mother held his father's head in her lap. She idly stroked his hair while humming a song. A voice behind Luka spoke. "This is how you remember them, huh?" Luka turned to see his own face. The doppelganger from his dreams, still clad in a yellow hazmat suit, still carrying a look of disdain behind empty eyes. Look at this perfectly cozy scene. You know it wasn't really like this. The figure picked up a toy block and inspected it. It's amazing the facades that one can build given the right materials. Not that I blame us. These are a child's memories, all warm and fuzzy. You don't remember, do you? Luka snatched the block from the figure's yellow-gloved hand. Remember what? The doppelganger pointed to the couch. The last day we saw him alive. The day he chose to abandon us. Luka turned to look at his father, still lounging on the couch. That's not true. He didn't abandon us. The doppelganger waved his hand dismissively. Everything is true here. It's just a matter of what we choose to see. Well, let me show you. The world flickered and pulsed. Luka was sitting next to his bed, listening to his heartbeat with one of his dad's stethoscopes. The doppelganger limped into the room. No, we both know that's not how this went. He grabbed Luka's hand and guided the stethoscope to the floor. Luka heard muffled shouting, brought close by the stethoscope. It was his parents, fighting. Do you remember what we did next? Luka gave a slow nod and crept down the hall to peek through the banister. He could see the outline of his mother at the bottom of the stairs. Damn it, Walt. We can't afford to get involved in this. She was scared. His father stepped forward.
What am I supposed to do? Just watch? There's a sickness in this town, and we both know who's behind it. I swore an oath to help people. I won't turn my back on them.
Luka's mother grabbed Walt. She was crying, pleading, "I can't lose you." Walt calmly removed Eleanor's hand from his shoulder.
What's right is right, and what's wrong is wrong. I could never live with myself if I let Sharper get away with this. Eleanor raised her voice.
Spare me your bullshit platitudes. What about our son?
Luka flinched, dropping the stethoscope down the stairs. Walt turned with a panicked smile. Luka, is that you, buddy?
With tears in his eyes, Luka descended the stairs. Mom? Dad? What's going on? Walt dropped to a knee to meet Luka eye to eye.
Nothing, buckaroo. Your mom and I just got a little overexcited is all.
Luka placed the stethoscope against his father's chest. His heart was racing. It sounded like you were going somewhere. Walt gently removed the device from Luka's ears.
Listen to me, Luka. I have some business to take care of. I'll be back in time to tuck you in.
Luka hugged his father tightly. Promise? Walt stood up and walked to the door. He glanced over his shoulder.
I promise.
With a wink and a grin, he put on his hat and strode out into the evening sun. A figure approached soundlessly from the foggy snowfall. It stood above them, lingering in contemplation. Slowly raising one hand above Iggy, it snapped out 2 brisk raps on his head. From a deep slumber, Iggy sprang up defensively. Whether it was the calming presence or the recognition that he was not in danger, Iggy felt his clenched fists lower. Luka looked up, gradually remembering his whereabouts. The figure exhaled a cloud of warm vapor. When it came to complete strangers, Iggy had trouble cobbling together an insult. Iggy huffed with gratification.
Nat began to turn away indifferently. Iggy turned sharply and began to stomp off. Realizing he'd worn their patience then, Nat relented. Luka and Iggy turned around with hope in their eyes. Nat took a deep breath in. Nat exhaled slowly, then snapped his fingers. For a brief moment, Luka and Iggy let themselves believe that some great magic was about to unfold. Until they opened their eyes and found themselves in the exact same place. Cold and disheartened. Nat narrowed his eyes, furrowed his brow, and uttered, Luka began to laugh uncomfortably. He looked down at his feet. His eyes darted back and forth in contemplation. With a sudden pain, a thought struck him. He sprinted off into the pale distance. As Iggy turned to follow, Nat called out.
Chapter 6.
The source.
Nat expressed his sympathy with a shrug and sauntered off as unassumingly as he'd arrived. He'd given Luka and Iggy what they needed, and nothing more. As Luka sprinted across the snow, the events of the past few days became clearer, pieces to a larger puzzle. Rollo said he was underground somewhere, captured. Mr. Kerr tried to cover it up with lies. The clipboards were hell-bent on capturing Iggy. It all seemed to point to perennial harvest. But right now, there was one thing that Luka needed to know. Luka stopped dead in his tracks. The tree was gone, uprooted and moved, leaving a raw gash in the earth. He dropped to his knees and dug wildly at the cold snow. His numb hands hit something hard, a headstone. A dry whisper escaped Luka's lips. There was no reply, just snow-covered silence. Iggy finally noticed the tears welling in Luka's eyes and the snow-covered grave. Suddenly, they heard the crunch of approaching footsteps in the snow. He bent down to scoop up a snowball and lobbed it playfully.
Luka stuttered through heaving sobs.
Iggy gave Luka a solid smack on the back of his head. Luka wiped his eyes with a sleeve. Iggy flashed a mischievous smile and cracked his knuckles. Iggy and Luka shared a skeptical look. Iggy darted behind a large pine and began digging furiously. He emerged holding a shoebox with a crude skull painted on its lid. Luka rolled his eyes with realization. Iggy stifled a chuckle.
Iggy triumphantly raised the shoebox. Luka and Iggy inched up to the edge of the hole with bewilderment in their eyes. Arctic air breathed out of the cavern in heaving gusts. Mr. Kerr gazed down the abyss in contemplation. Kerr scratched the back of his head. His face contorted into a saccharine grin. others. Iggy turned to Luka with a sly glance. Iggy waved the box into the air, threatening to drop it down the hole. Iggy plucked a single bottle rocket from the box and held it up with reverence. After a long pause, Mr. Kerr flung up his hand with frustration. Mr. Kerr sighed into the frigid air. With a nonchalant flick, Iggy tossed the firework into the hole. With a growl, Kerr leapt at Iggy, crashing through Luka. Iggy tried to twist away, but in the struggle they both tumbled over the side. Luka dove forward, bracing Iggy's hand just before it slipped. His grip was made precarious by the cold, wet snow. He could see Kerr further down, clinging to Iggy's coat. Mr. Kerr gasped with insult. With a wild look in his eye, Mr. Kerr began to hum a proud melody. Luka's hand began to cramp. His voice began to crack. Luka felt Iggy loosen his grasp. Every muscle in Luka's body burned. Luka felt his hand slipping.
A calm settled over Iggy's face. Iggy's voice was colder than the bitter air billowing from the chasm. Luka had no choice but to accept Iggy's request. With a quiet blink, Luka watched a teardrop sail down into the howling void. As his fingers slowly gave up, he met eyes with Iggy. The two silhouettes were swallowed by darkness. We have some idea what that would look like. A fierce twinkle flashed in Nat's eyes. With a chuckle, Nat turned and walked west. Dumbfounded, Luka followed behind him, trudging through the snow. Every step taking him further away from everyone and everything he knew, and closer to destiny. To be continued in Beacon pines, pines harder. Revenge served cold. Second time's a charm? Wait, that's it? This ends with a crummy cliffhanger just when it was getting good? I was even starting to like Iggy. No way. I refuse to be associated with some never-ending parade of sequels. Let's go back and find something more definitive.